development of many African societies cannot be separated from historical systems that enrich others at Africans' expense. And importantly, it means ensuring that African people themselves define what justice and reparations should look like. Ladies and gentlemen, as a light framing for this engagement, we are confronted by a troubling contradiction. Slavery is acknowledged internationally as a crime against humanity, yet meaningful accountability remains limited. Those who profit from this system often resist substantive responsibility, while the descendants of those who suffered continue to live with the consequences. This reality reminds us that symbolic acknowledgement, while important, is insufficient without structural action. We must therefore recognition becomes merely ceremonial. History has shown us that institutions acknowledge injustice while still delaying meaningful transformation. That is why movements, civil society organizations, youth networks, scholars, artists, and grassroots communities remain essential actors in this struggle. Government alone cannot carry this agenda. Reparative justice has always advanced because ordinary people organized, mobilized, documented histories, challenged dominant narratives, demanded accountability. African movements have historically played a critical role in resisting oppression and advancing liberation. From anti-colonial struggles to civil rights movements, from campaign against apartheid to contemporary movement for racial justice, collective action has consistently shaped political change. Today, a new generation must continue that work. Distinguished participants, this conversation is also deeply connected to the broader Pan-African project. Pan-Africanism has always been rooted in the belief that African people, wherever they may be in the world, share linked history, shared struggles, and common aspiration. The transatlantic slave trade attempted to capture African identity and humanity across continent and generation. Yet, despite this violence, African people preserve culture, memory, resistance, and solidarity. The reparation movement, therefore, is not simply about the past. It is also about reclaiming agency over the future. It is about ensuring that African development is no longer defined through dependency or historical disadvantage. It is about preserving cultural memory and historical truth for future generations. It is about strengthening African institutions and ensuring greater equity within international order. And importantly, it is about affirming the dignity and humanity of African people everywhere. As we engage in today's dialogue, it is important that we create space for honest reflection and strategic thinking. We must ask ourselves, how do we transform growing global acknowledgement into concrete political pressure? How do we strengthen solidarity between continental and diaspora movements? How do we ensure that grassroots communities and young people are not excluded from shaping reparation discourse? And how do we sustain momentum on symbolic commemorations and declaration? And how do we build long-term strategies that connect reparative justice to broader questions of economic justice, governance development, and global equity? These are not simple questions, but they are necessary ones. Distinguished participants, civil society has a potential and practically important role to play in this process. Civil society organizations often serve as custodians of memory, defenders of justice, and amplifiers of community voices. They help ensure that conversation around reparation remain people-centered rather than purely institutional. Artists, scholars, and cultural practitioners also play an indispensable role. Through storytelling, research, literature, music, film, and public education, they help societies confront difficult histories while reclaiming narratives that were historically distorted or erased. Young people, too, must remain central to this movement. The future of reparative justice depends on intergenerational continuity. It depends on young Africans and members of the diaspora understanding these histories not as distant events, but as realities that continue to shape present condition and future possibility. Ladies and gentlemen, the journey from recognition to repair will not be immediate, and it will not be easy. Historical injustices on the scale cannot be addressed through isolated gesture or temporal political statement. It requires sustained advocacy, institutional courage, international solidarity, and collective determination. But despite the challenges, this movement also presents an opportunity to strengthen Pan-African collaboration, an opportunity to advance global conversation on justice and accountability, an opportunity to challenge historical silences and reshape narrative, an opportunity to build a more equitable future grounded in dignity, truth, and shared humanity. As we proceed with today's engagement, I encourage all participants to contribute openly, thoughtfully, and constructively. Let this not simply be a discussion about historical justice or historical injustices, but a conversation about collective action, political imagination, and transformative change. Allow me once again to commend African Rising and all partners involved in convening this timely and important dialogue. I want to thank you for your attention, and I wish you a fruitful and a meaningful discussion. Thank you once again for your audience.
Thank you so much, Ambassador William Kariu, for delivering the keynote address and for reminding us that reparation work is very collective, and we will not get the answers immediately. We will have to really have sustained advocacy and the need for cross solidarity and cross collaboration between the diaspora family and the African family as well. Thank you so much. And I would like to open the floor for two people to contribute to the keynote address of Ambassador William Kariu, and then we will hear from Oyo Sungu as the next speaker. Then later on we can hear from our amazing artists, Wezi Mhone and eventually Linda Schumer. So if you could raise your hand, I think I'll be able to see you, and then I can give you the microphone, I guess. Do we have any reflections, thoughts on the keynote address of Ambassador William? Okay, then I guess we might have to keep this for the next round. Yeah, so let's have Oyo Sungu on the call. Oyo, you have the floor, comrade.
Thank you, Comrade Dan Maua, and many thanks for the invite to this important conversation. I hope you can hear me. I have a flu, so my voice is halfway down. My name is Sungu Oyo. I'm a writer. I'm an economist by training, and I currently serve as the coordinator of MWAMCO, which is a Pan-African popular pedagogy collective. I think this is a really interesting and really important conversation to have. And for me, a really personal engagement, because 5 years ago, I served at Africans Rising as I was coordinating a campaign called Rewrite History, which basically looked at the legacies of slavery and colonialism and how they manifest as economic or political systems in today's world. So for me, this is home, and it's always good to be back home. I think I'll just start by affirming our struggle for reparations, because it is a just and righteous struggle. I know there's many people who ask, like, why should African people demand reparations? Why shouldn't they just build their countries? But our struggle is a just and righteous struggle because it arises from the dehumanization and subjugation of African people over the past 500 years or so. In 1482, Capital declared war without terms against African people, basically on the basis of race, on the basis of class, on the basis of gender. And the wider struggle for reparations is basically a struggle against imperialism, if we are to be honest with each other, because we know that slavery is colonialism abroad, and colonialism itself was slavery at home. And so no one should ever question this struggle. In the era of slavery, at least 12 million people were shipped from the African continent. And these are conservative estimates from historians of the transatlantic slave trade. At least 1.5 million people lost their lives in that crossing across the Atlantic Ocean. Because ships capsized, there are people who are stabbed, there are people who are African people who are thrown overboard, and there's also people who said that, who actually threw themselves overboard on their own because they said they cannot be subjugated by other humans. And so the ocean floor to this day is littered with the bones of African people. And the most recent discoveries, as recently as 2005, we still have, for example, the remains of a slave ship discovered across the English Channel. In the slave trade, during the slave trade, countries like Portugal, Netherlands, Denmark, Britain, France participated and made immense profit. And the proceeds that came out of this trade informs the financial backbone of Europe, basically. Because if you look, for example, at the financial sector, banks like Barclays Bank or Citibank were established using proceeds from the slave trade. The Barclay brothers were renowned slave traders. If you look at education, universities like Harvard, which are the centers of intellectual thought, were established using proceeds from slave trade. You look at Harvard, you look at Oxford, you look at even Yale University, which was established by a donation from Elihu Yale, who was a slave trader. So Europe basically is established on the back of Africa, if we are to quote Walter Rodney. If we look at even at religious institution, I'm an Anglican, for example, the Anglican Church owns properties all over London, and the Anglican Church heavily participated in the slave trade, and these properties were bought using proceeds from the slave trade. And so, including sites of power, the White House was built by slaves, the US Capitol was built by slaves, basically by African people, and African people have built the world. The world has been built on the backs of African people. Walter Rodney, who wrote How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, reminds us that the fastest periods of economic growth in Europe and in the United States was during the eras of slavery and colonialism. And so when we demand for reparations, it is a just and righteous struggle. Colonialism itself, sometimes people say there's countries that did not colonize others. At the Berlin Conference, all European countries were present. The US, which is not regarded by many as a colonial power, sent a delegation, including African countries like Ethiopia. Ethiopia sent a delegation to the Berlin Conference. And I think history is so obscured because a lot of times, these are clear. The only European country that did not attend the Berlin Conference is Switzerland. All of Europe was there, from Eastern Europe, whether we talk of Russia and who, to the western side of Europe. And I really thank Ambassador Kariu for his speech, for his insights. And I think we are at a critical juncture of this struggle against reparations. When the UN General Assembly passed the resolution to recognize slavery as a crime against humanity on the 25th of March, they basically reaffirmed what African people have been saying over the decades. They reaffirmed the Durban Declaration and Program of Action from probably 2 decades ago, I think. And so I think because I do not have time, I think what we really need to look at is whether those who participated in the slave trade are willing to listen to us who are demanding reparations at this particular moment in time. And when we talk about reparations, Ambassador rightfully pointed out, it extends far beyond monetary compensation. We are asking for the recognition and acknowledgement of these crimes against humanity. Because how do you go to ask for reparations from someone who doesn't even recognize the crime they committed? We are demanding for apologies of these crimes. And lastly, we are demanding for reparations because we know that those reparations are due to us. In 2016, coming back to recent history, in 2016, Robert Lambert, who's the Speaker of the Lower House in Germany, introduced a motion and which started a huge debate about reparations in the country of Namibia. Just to move back briefly, you will remember that there was the massacre of the Herero and Nama people in Namibia, where over 100,000 people were pushed into the desert and died of starvation, dehydration, and others were shot. And this was on the orders of General Lothar von Trotter, a German general who issued an order. If you study history, he said, exterminate the natives. And German officers pushed the Herero and Nama people into the desert. And so when Robert Lambert in 2016 in the German parliament instituted this debate, it took a few years, but by 2021, Germany said that it would recognize what happened in Namibia today, what we today call Namibia, as a crime against, as a genocide, a crime against humanity. But they had refused for several years because Germany was saying that any crime which happened after 1951, when the UN Genocide Convention was instituted, cannot be classified as genocide. And that is basically a racist approach to dealing with fundamental issues in society. And so in 2021, Germany said it would pay 1.1 billion euros as reparations to Namibia. But then that same Germany said that this reparations would come in the form of aid and would be paid over a period of 30 years. Comrades, what is that? That is a racist approach to reparations. And so even as we frame reparations, we must really know what we want to do such that our struggle for reparations does not end up strengthening existing colonial patterns of economics, basically. And even Vekuli Rukoro, the former Attorney General of Namibia and who was a paramount chief of the Herero people, described it as a very racist approach to reparations, because that same Germany, which wanted to pay 1.1 billion shillings to the people of Namibia, had paid 90 billion shillings to the Jews who were massacred. And so the only problem people have with reparations across the world is when it's reparations that are due to African people. When the Jews were paid reparations, there was no problem against it. No one had a problem with it. When the Armenians were paid reparations, no one had a problem against it. And so we as African people must really define and frame our approach and our demand for reparations. And so a lot of the countries that we are demanding reparations from to this day, as I conclude, still do not recognize the crimes they committed. King Felipe of Belgium in June 2020 spoke about having the deepest regrets about what happened in the Congo. And we know that in the Congo between 1885 and 1908, it was the personal property of King Leopold, and over 10 million Congolese people were killed, comrades. When he was asked about an apology and what the only thing he could issue was deepest regrets. In October 2022, at the 51st regular session of the UN Human Rights Council, Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire, introduced a motion against racism, against xenophobia, against racial discrimination, and that whole range of backward activities. Britain voted against this motion. Rita French, who was the ambassador of Britain to the UN Human Rights Council at the time, said that voting in support of this motion, which was against racism, would basically make Britain liable to pay reparations. And so their thought is not around correcting history. Their thought is around the financial liabilities that they would possibly incur. And of course, we demand that those resources, that money, because it righteously belongs to us. But we also recognize that reparations extends beyond mere financial resources. And I'm just wrapping up. I know I might have gone overboard on time. It extends to education of African people, because we know there is a lot of our people who also do not have a full understanding of this historical context and what it means and its implications in terms of today's political and economic patterns. I mentioned the honest recognition of these crimes. We need truth and healing commissions. Scientists have told us over the past few decades that trauma can become embedded in the DNA of a human being and even past generations. And so in the places where, for example, colonialism was brutal, those are the parts of Africa where you have the highest rates of violence in society, especially where settler colonialism existed. And we have to look at that trauma from that historical epoch and how it has been passed across generations. But also, more importantly, we demand the return of artifacts, whether they are spiritual artifacts, whether they are cultural artifacts, because these things are important to us and our ethnic groups in our different dimensions. We demand the return of human remains, because in a lot of places, including in Tanzania, the Germans took human skulls to go and study them because they thought that African people have smaller brains. And I was recently watching a documentary, and there's this family that had gone to Germany to look for their great-grandfather, because in their culture, you cannot be buried without a head. So they are still looking for these remains, committing resources, their personal resources, and doing DNA tests, because in Berlin, you have like whole basements in government buildings filled with skulls of African people. I think it really extends beyond the financial sense. And at an economic level, it must also cover basic things like land reform, especially in the former settler colonies. It must, most importantly, cover financial compensation. But then, in 2020, I wrote a book titled Reparations Now, basically outlining the historical context of our struggle for reparations and what we need to do moving forward. And as African people and as people who stand in solidarity with all oppressed people across the world, we recognize that all progress in society arises from struggle. No society has ever made fundamental change without a certain amount of struggle. And so we must continue to push this struggle for reparations. And it's good that at this particular juncture, there is renewed interest on the international scene, at the United Nations level, at the level of the African Union, because 5 years ago when I was coordinating the Rewrite History campaign at Africans Rising, The African Union, for example, would never respond to emails about reparations. And so for me, it's so encouraging when I see organs of the African Union and even the United Nations General Assembly passing this resolution. I think it's a moral step, but at a political level, we have to push further, because we have to recognize that the United Nations has passed so many resolutions, including against the genocide in Gaza, but it's still ongoing, because the rules-based world order does not respect the United Nations General Assembly. The big powers, which have veto powers, do not really respect it. So for us, it's to build on this moral recognition and push further. Let's create a wider framework and invite as many people, many organizations, many movements, all segments of Africans, both on the continent and in the diaspora, to further this struggle. I'm really glad to be part of this conversation and looking forward to the steps we will make in the coming days, coming weeks, coming months, and coming years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oyosungu. That was very in-depthful, and thank you for reminding us that we cannot take chances and reinforce the colonial narratives. A good friend of mine, Gadara, last year in one of the spaces that we shared, really talked about something people have normalized, such as color grading, and he talked about how deliberately, when it's conflict in Sudan and it's conflict in another part of the world that is not Africa, how the footage is reported and how we sometimes subconsciously reinforce the same colonial narratives. And everybody in the room was shocked, because for those of us who are either retired journalists, recovering journalists, or current journalists, that when you go to study the practice of journalism, what you're taught, obviously, where it comes from. And sometimes we are not bold enough to challenge that kind of teaching experience. And I think for me personally, my saddest moment was last year in December. I was in The Hague, and I have made it my business in the last 3 years to be walking to museum wherever parts of the world I'm traveling. And there was a picture of a small girl who is 9 years and is unnamed, and she has no hands, and she was given as a gift to the Prince of Netherlands. And they display it like, I don't think I will ever heal. It's probably the saddest picture that I saw last year. And so this is why this journey must continue, especially because colonization is not stopping. There is neo-colonization right now. And I know a lot of the times we don't really talk about things as the Arab slave trade, for example, and the implication it has on our people in East Africa. And this is why I think I'm happy today because we have Linda Schumer, who is definitely going to speak to that. But maybe before I give you the audience, Linda, to speak, allow me to pick one or two hands that would like to contribute to either Kamarandi Sungu's submission or Ambassador Kariu's submission. So if you raise your hand, then I should definitely be able to see you. So as people are planning to raise their hands, I'm going to read something that somebody put in the chat box. I think, Naomi, you reminded us of something because I had seen it. So let me just go to it and read. Yeah. Yeah, we must be careful that reparations interventions are not racial responses. I totally agree with that, and I would give another chance again after the speaker is done. Linda Schumer, you actually have the opportunity now to speak to us about memory, community healing, and reparative justice. And as somebody who is coming from Freetown community, and I know this will be interesting for folks who do not come from East Africa as well. Karibu.
Asante sana. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you to Africans Rising. Thank you to everybody that has made it inside this call. Standing on the protocols that were established by His Excellency the Ambassador Karu. When we talk of memory and what memory is to me, memory for me is my heritage. Remembering and acknowledging the fact that I am Linda Schumer, the daughter of Ruth Fondo, who was and is the daughter of Clara Mterere Fondo, who was the daughter of Francis Ralph Mterere, who was the son of Farah Ralph Mterere. Farah Ralph Mterere landed in Mombasa and was placed in the village of Freetown, a freed slave of the Portuguese protectorate. He hailed from northern Mozambique, and once settled in Freetown, he married a fellow slave that hailed from the Mtwara region of Tanzania. Memory for me is standing up into this meeting, wearing this clothes, a fabric that was used for celebration by the people of Freetown as they celebrated and have continued to choose to remember and to appreciate their senior members in the community. Memory for me is wearing these coconut shell earrings to honor the land that received my great-great-grandfather. Memory for me is coming into this meeting and holding this coconut shell bowl that carries in it seashells and pebbles from the Indian Ocean, in which my great-great-grandfather sailed in from the Mozambican coast and finally being set free in Mombasa. As I come into this meeting, memory for me is embracing the lesso, a fabric that is worn by ladies along the East African coast. And on this lesso, I have the inscription, tuombeane heri na mafanikio kwa maisha yetu. And I wrap us in this prayer from this lesso, which translated means, we pray and let's pray for blessings and success in our lives, even as we continue to seek reparations and reparative justice for the hurt and the harm that happened and that continues to happen to us. I come into this meeting with the memory of my grandmother in this bangle that I have worn on my wrist for close to 10 years now, because I choose to walk daily with my grandmother, for whom it shall be 10 years in just a few days since she left this earth as we know it. And when we think about community healing vis-a-vis the recognition of slave trade as a grave violation against humanity, with focus on only the transatlantic slave trade. How I wish that the people and the present and future ancestors of the Indian Ocean, East African, and Arab slave trade could also be incorporated into this resolution, because we must acknowledge that slave trade along the East African coast, in the Indian Ocean, in the Arab states, actually did take place for a longer period of time, involved a whole lot more people. It was a trade that spanned over 12 centuries, running from the 7th century and into the 19th century. What does healing and community healing look like for the people of Freetown in the present day? The present day people of Freetown, descendants of the slaves that were freed at the port in Mkomani on the coast of Mombasa, are presently not even acknowledged as a community by the Kenyan government, by the land on which they live. So when we talk about reparative justice, we are talking about more than just international reparations. We are talking about national reparations. We are talking about, and I liked that Sungwoyo talked about acknowledgement. And for us as a people of Freetown, we are asking for the acknowledgement and seeking the acknowledgement of not just the international platform, but even nationally. We are seeking apologies. We are seeking reparations. For me, this is a very fresh calling in the different work that I do day to day. I have known since I was young that my great-great-grandfather and great-great-grandmother were freed slaves, but hadn't quite internalized everything. And this becomes for me a journey for my people, a journey for myself, just in recognizing that indeed, as a present ancestor, I am probably halfway through my life, but my future ancestors, in the name of my children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, like I am to my great-great-grandfather, fully need to appreciate and to understand what their heritage is, just as much as I do. Reparative justice is looking at everything as a whole, reparative justice is ensuring that the language that is used in the different spaces is actually language that is not perpetrating neocolonialism, neo-slavery in its many forms. And it is, as my brother Oyo stated, it is the return of our artifacts. It is the return of our human remains. It is the land reforms. And when we talk about land reforms, for me, it is a subject that is very close to me, because for the people of Freetown, a lot of the land on which we were settled in has over time been sliced away and taken by the powers that be. It has been mistreated and disrespected. It is financial compensation. By the education of the African people to be able to achieve truth and healing. Indeed, community healing, as far as slave trade is concerned, is created by spaces such as this that Africans Rising has given to us, to be able to come and to just talk and find solutions and chart a way forward for ourselves as far as slavery is concerned. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Linda. That was very powerful. And thank you for bringing all the visible and non-visible memory to this call. And thank you for honoring your ancestors and the matriarchs that stood before us. I would like to open for questions before I call Wezi Mhoni, but I'm going to read some of the things that you've been posting on the question. So there is a question from Francis Wanaswa. Reparation can be an intimidating term as we call for acknowledgement of historic crimes, meaningful apologies, and reparation. We must also articulate clearly and proactively what reparation should entail, who should receive what, and in what form. Defining this upfront reduces resistance from those responsible from their successors by shifting the conversation from fear of unknown to concrete structured pathway. Thank you. I think that's not a question, more of a thought. Then reparation can be, okay, it's the same thing. Is there a formal petition claiming reparations, specifically to which organization, states, corporations? For how much? Are there local chapters in each African country where people may pick up these conversations from? How should we respond when perpetrators and their successors argue that African rulers and traders were accomplices in the slave trade? And how do we place that claim in its proper historical and moral context with respect to the claim of reparation? So those are two questions there. I'm gonna read something else that is coming up. In addition, we in the diaspora should also have land rights in Africa and open borders. This would bridge the gap between us. Yeah, okay. I was trying to see if there are more questions. Let me see if there is a hand. I don't see a hand per se, but I'm gonna give the opportunity to Sungu. Sungu and Linda, because I mean, the question is not really addressed to any specific panelist, but Sungu, if you could pick on this question on whether there is existing formal petition claiming reparation, then I will, yeah, then we can move on from there. We can probably come to Wezi and then come to the rest of the team and then come to the ambassador. Yep. So
what I'm aware of is that there's been a number of efforts over the years aimed at demanding for reparations. However, I am not sure whether in the current moment there is a petition. I know that there is a petition which Africans Rising shared across the world in 2020 under the 2021, I think, if I'm not wrong. I might be wrong. I might be missing the timeline. And that it garnered quite significant international traction. And what I think is that if there is any petitions, then we would need to support them. But beyond that, there needs to be, especially in light of this resolution by the UN General Assembly, there needs to be a concerted effort, and probably one of the outcomes of this meeting could be a petition. And a petition is not enough. We also need actions around that petition in both the African countries and the African diaspora. CARICOM, the Caribbean Community of Countries, has a reparations commission, the CARICOM's Reparations Commission, which was formerly headed by Ambassador Comison, who I think hails from Barbados, if I'm not wrong. And at the African Union level, we do not have such a commission or such a body. And so if we can link with CARICOM and also the European Reparations Commission, and there is one in North America, in the US and Canada, and then popularize it across the world would really be great. Or if there is existing petitions that are already circulating, then we can popularize those instead of running parallel efforts to those. We can all join efforts. Thank you.
thank you so much, Sungu. I know last year we were working with one university in Brazil, and we had a petition that we were petitioning the president of Brazil for reparations, but also continued violations such as epistemological injustices. And this also was the injustices and violations were done to countries, including not just the Brazilians who are living in Brazil, but also African countries such as Cabo Verde, the Lusophone countries in total. So that also could be an avenue or a petition that we could enrich as well, to reach as many people as we can. But I am going to give you Ambassador Kariu to speak into whether the African Union is looking at having that commission, because I remember during last year's ordinary summit, I think there was such conversation in the ECOSOC meeting that we had in Addis. So if we could speak to that, then I think after that we can allow Wezi to make her submission and then open finally. Ambassador William. I don't know if I still see him. Yeah. Or maybe he can you hear us? Or maybe he can make the submission after you, Wezi. So Wezi, as an artist, in this conversation of reparations, could you speak to us around that? I know you already started reclaiming the narrative through your songs in many ways, but we definitely want to hear more about that. You're welcome. I think Wezi's screen is frozen. Wezi, can you hear us?
Good
Oh my
afternoon.
God.
Greetings
Good
from
afternoon.
Zambia.
Okay.
Greetings. How are you?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead. We are
I hope
fine.
I'm audible. All right, thanks. My name is Wezi. For the people that are seeing my face and hearing of me for the very first time, I'm a Zambia-born singer-songwriter. I'm also an activist and a record label executive. And I'm very passionate about Pan-Africanism. I believe in non-performative Pan-Africanism. I believe in being practical. I believe in doing research. I believe in reading. I believe in it being inculcated into my lifestyle in the way that I walk, I talk, and the way that I interact with myself, my environment, and the continent that I love very much. I am humbled to be part of this conversation, and I'm very grateful to everybody that has made their submissions so far. And I feel like it's very important for us to have these conversations continuously because what comes out today is going to be different with what comes out the next time. We keep on expanding our plethora of knowledge, and that's what is important. I want to begin by saying we have to also be practical in the way that we demand for justice. We do not ask or beg for justice. We demand for justice. The legacy of slavery and colonization on our continent is evident till this day. Even our very politics are rooted in neocolonialism, imperialism, and even the structures that were designed to protect the voices, the existence of our culture, our heritage, our Africanness are being used as tools of manipulation and emotional blackmail. We do not fully own our land, and that's not in any way aggressive. I mean that in the most optimistic approach. The Victoria Falls is not the Victoria Falls. It is the Mosi Otunya. It is Shungu na Mutitima, but it's called the Victoria Falls, and it carries the name, the legacy of the queen of an empire that was at the helm of colonizing our nation, Zambia. And small things like that can indicate to you what is currently happening when it comes to the reality on the ground, the impact and the legacy of colonization and slavery. In the middle of Zambia, there's a town called Kawe. It is the most polluted town in the world. I would love for you to do a little bit of research about Kawe. When our land is polluted, even the animals that are grazing and that will be feeding off are going to be affected. Till this day, generations are born in that piece of land, and there's many effects, medical and unlimited number of side effects. Lead poisoning is still the reality in Kawe. The remains of our great, 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 great ancestor, Broken Hill Man, Kawe Man, are not in Zambia. They're in Great Britain. I don't know what is happening to him and his remains. I don't know how they are benefiting from keeping him, but I can only imagine what goes on with museums and conversations about income. But Zambia is not benefiting in any way. He's still out there, our ancestor. The legacy of colonization and slavery is something that we can't even say is an illusion. We are I think not angry enough, but we shouldn't even express bitterness. I believe in approaching this situation with optimism. I believe that I belong to the generation that sees the sacrifices of Kenneth Kaunda, Simon Mwansaka Pwepwe, and the rest of the freedom fighters that committed. They did their part. And that's why I'm on this panel today, to continue doing my part within my lifetime. But I believe that we are the generation that shakes things up, to honor the sacrifices of those that bled and died, those that lived on, traumatized, those that loved and lost because of the oppression of those people that came to invade our space. Reparations is not about paying back, because no amount of money can ever amount to the damage that was caused, the life that was lost, the impact of slavery and colonization on our continent. When you see things like xenophobia, you see the side effects of the things that we've survived. There was a mistrust caused. There was inferiority complex imposed. Some of my fellow Africans do not trust our fellow Africans because there's a narrative that slavery began with ourselves. Colonization thrived because of the selfishness of some of our leaders. We always have to invest in reading material, and we have to encourage authors and researchers, archaeologists, scientists, people that mean well for our continent, to collect data and to publish it so that we all know the truth told and filtered by our own people. Because how do you expect the one who oppressed you to tell you the truth about your history? I think this is what Mama Miriam Makeba once talked about. And I always believed that there's no way that our education system and our curriculum can have the truth about our ancestors when it was written by those that oppressed them. Of course, our schools system, I don't know how it is in other African countries, but ours in Zambia taught us about the great Marco Polo and the great Christopher Columbus, the great David Livingstone. Never, never about the kings of the Lubalunda kingdom. Never about the great kings and the chiefs of the many kingdoms, the ancient Africa before its invasion. Why is that? It's not because history was never written. It's not because stories were never told, but even that, they tempered with it. I believe that they cannot erase our history. It is still there. It's in our DNA. We know our truth, and now we have to be very deliberate about putting it into the education system. We have to grow up knowing our flaws, our strengths, and our weaknesses in our history. It's very balanced. We are not barbaric primitives. We are not a diseased, poverty-stricken continent. We are youthful, we are intelligent, we are resourceful, and sometimes we are gullible. Some people came and they convinced us that our way of worship was satanic and demonic, and we ran away with that. We lived with it. Some still believe in it till this day. Some people came and convinced us that our way of dressing was primitive and backwards. We believed it. Some still believe in it. So I think that to decolonize Africa isn't just to demand for justice, but also to recreate the education system in Africa. Teach mathematics in our languages. Teach science in our languages. Teach our languages. I believe so with all my heart. I also think that we need to be able to listen to one another. I hope I'm being audible. I'm so sorry about my baby screaming out. But I believe deep down my heart that with conversations and platforms like this, we are definitely headed the right direction as a continent. In as much as we demand for justice, we should never stop demanding for justice. We should also demand for accountability from one another. We must always encourage such platforms, such initiatives, such conversations. Let's not have a once-off thing. Let's have follow-ups and let's have practical places, because I want our great ancestor, Broken Hill Man, to be back home in Kabwe in this lifetime, in my lifetime. I want to see it happen. I want to see UNESCO recognize Shungu na Mtitima, Mosi Otunya, be called by its name, the name that it was given by our ancestors way before David Livingstone came to name it the Victoria Falls. And I can imagine many other things with the rest of the continent. I would love to thank Africans Rising for having me on this platform, for adding me to this conversation. I apologize for the network issues and the technical issues also on my part. But I feel like we should continue with this conversation beyond this moment, and I will always make myself available. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Wezi, for that submission. And you reminded me of my favorite person, Fundi Maponga Marara. So lately, he's been traveling to Europe and renaming those Europe, like places in
I see
African
that on
languages.
social media.
And I love what he's been doing with that. Yeah, thank you so much once again, and thank you also for using your artwork as a space to reclaim the narrative and a space to reclaim our memories as Africans. And I'm definitely gonna be excited when you join us sometimes around next month for a conversation with artists, and how African artists are using oral traditions through their music to pass them,
Yes.
because kids no longer sit with their grandmothers as they used to. So yeah, thank you. But do stay in the call though. I'm sure people would definitely want to contribute to all these conversations. So yeah, and this is my favorite moment, I guess, because it's an open space to contribute. And how we're going to start it off, I guess, we will start with you, Ambassador William. And there's a question on how do we ensure inclusivity in the reparation struggle. For example, the trans-Saharan slave trade, 7th to 19th century, the Arab slave trade, 9th to 19th century as well, and the Portuguese expansion uh, from 15th to 19th century. When we talk about all these forms of slave trade, and the UN has recognized one form of it, how do the rest of us who work on reparations then integrate this into the broader reparation struggle? And maybe the second question that you could respond to is, I know that there were plans to set up a commission. I don't remember if it was a commission or a committee for reparations at the AU level. And it will be interesting to hear how far the plans are as per now. Ambassador William?
Yeah, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I've not been following because I've been in several other meetings. But the question about inclusivity with relation to the struggle for reparation, I think it's a very interesting one. What I would want to say, I think it requires us to move beyond symbolic recognition, like I said, but to have what we refer to as more of a participatory kind of representation that is more responsive to the diverse experiences which the person who raised the question has actually indicated. Those diverse experiences are very important, looking at the various affected communities. It's very important. But more fundamentally, if we're looking at inclusivity, we should be able to look at various factors. One, I would say we need to be able to center affected communities when we want to discuss the whole aspect of reparation. The second aspect, which I think is very fundamental, is to ensure that there is a gender responsive component towards this reparation conversation. We should also be very deliberate and intentional in including the youth and the future generation, because we are discussing very fundamental issues that have to deal with our contemporary society. And we are looking at how history affects our present day today. We should also be able to recognize, and I think the African Union have done a great work in that regard, the role of the diaspora. What is the role of the diaspora in this particular conversation? So we're looking at diaspora community across the Caribbean, the Americas, Europe, and elsewhere, and what fundamental role that they can play in this whole perspective. And our reparation should not only limited, like we talk about, to financial compensation. We've been looking at various components when we discuss what other forms of reparation are we going to look at. We look at education, scholarship, curriculum reform, because the mindset is also fundamental, the land restitution, issues of economic empowerment, the aspect of debt, justice, and equitable development, the truth-telling, the cultural restoration, and some institutions have been playing significant role on that. The whole aspect of institutional reform, the anti-racism measures that some organizations have been campaigning about, issues related to mental health, community healing initiative. So these are all aspects that we need to look into. So when we talk about inclusivity, inclusivity will be extremely broad. We have to look at various components. We have to look at various affected communities. We have to look at how do we build evidence through research, storytelling, so that we are not just talking from a point of view where we don't have evidence to give in view of some of the things that we want to look into. Ensuring transparency and accountability also is something else I think we can look at. So for me, a strong reparation movement is one that listens widely, that will share leadership, acknowledge diverse experiences of the damage that has been caused, and that more fundamentally that will create pathways for dignity and what we'll refer to as healing and structural transformation for affected people and the affected community. So inclusivity should take into consideration all this, in my view. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Could you also speak to the issue of the commission, the possibility of having a reparation commission at the AU level?
As you all aware, the AU 2025 theme was focusing on reparation. And within the broader framework of the reparation agenda and the framework itself, there is a request for the Commission to constitute two very important committees. One is the Committee of Experts, and then you also have the Committee of the legal reference scope. So these committees have been constituted. I think what we need to do is to see how we ensure that these committees are not operating in isolation. Like we have the reparation group, which we're talking about here. How do this committee interface with all these other constituents so that they are not operating from a point where they don't have interface with the constituents and the people out there? So within the framework of the broader reparation agenda within the African Union, there are clear framework on what is the role of the Committee of Experts. And the Committee of Experts, I think what we need to do, and I think it's part of their terms of reference, is for them to be able to engage widely with the African people through such movements and various organizations. And I think ECOSOC, as one of the institutions within the committee that provides representation through civil society into that committee, also have mechanism as to how we engage with relevant institutions so that we get feedback from this institution And then this feedback, we should be intentional and deliberate in submitting this feedback so that when we get to the point of developing even the African Common Position, you are developing an African Common Position that is responsive to the needs and realities and aspirations and concerns of citizens, not perspectives which are coming from an expert point of view only, but it is well informed from the views of the citizens. So I think what we are doing as part of this kind of conversation from the institutional point of view is to us to be able to connect the dots and link this kind of engagement and the output and the reports that will come out so that they get their way into the work of this committee, so that the committee will have relevant information that they will be able to utilize in the development and processes of the work that is supposed to do.
Thank you so much for that in-depth response. And thank you so much also for speaking on issues of gender. Last year, something beautiful happened. The University of Wits, I usually struggle with Wits and Wits, in South Africa, renamed one of their hall in the memory of Sarah Batman. And so the implication of violation is really huge on the women. And so in gender and reparations conversation is very close to my heart. I am going to open the floor for questions now. So you raise your hand and I'll be able to see you. And as you do that, I'll be reading some of those that have already been asked. Question for Ms. Mhone: how can we as a continent mobilize constructively and with agency towards adopting a unifying language such as Kiswahili so that we can ultimately teach, think, and produce knowledge in our own language? And this is such a critical conversation because the politics of languages is very divisive. I mean, it's clear today if we want to speak to North, South, and all these parts of Africa, then we are thinking, okay, do we need interpretation for the French speaking and all this? So Wezi, take up the question.
Thank you so much for the question. I'm not a scholar. I'm not qualified in any way. So this is solely my opinion. I think that we have to begin by sitting together constantly and understanding the risks and also the benefits of pursuing this in a practical sense, because within the confines of the different nations we belong to, there's that elephant in the room called tribalism. There's that thing that causes even genocides because on tribal grounds. So we have to be very honest and have conversations about this so that we all understand that this is not coming from superiority. It's not about a specific tribe being superior over other tribes in Africa, but for us to be able to own language to the extent that we can have communication that is authentic to Africans, from Cape to Cairo and everything in between. And that can't happen overnight. But I think that this conversation is not happening for the very first time here. There's a lot of people that have been talking about adopting an African language, but there's also the risk of tribalism because it's a real issue that we can't tiptoe around. We can't pretend it's not there. That would be very irresponsible. So how do we manage with that in mind? We can only establish how we can manage to establish a universal language for Africans, or maybe 3 official languages, or whatever we settle for 10. As long as we start somewhere. My recommendation is that we have to begin. Our priority is to begin to speak in that direction with that motive, and then as we go, we learn from each other, and then we grow together, because the Bantu languages have got elements that sound similar. What you call the sun in your language will probably be similar to what I call the sun in my language. Zuva. Zuva is the sun in my language, and I'm from the eastern part
of Zambia. And then I don't know what you call the sun in your language. I don't know what somebody from Cape Verde calls the sun in their language. And it's not all Bantu languages, but there's similarities in our languages. What do you call water in your language? We call it manzi, where we come from. You find that somewhere it's called Maji, somewhere you see that there's similarities there. So we understand that some of these things came from one source. And when we begin to understand that, we do not risk being divided in tribal lines and say there's a superiority here. We kind of see that we are more alike than we are unlike. We kind of see that we are more similar than we are different. And then we see which amongst the languages are broader spoken across nations, and we can expand it so that it can be easily embraced, or people can embrace it with the understanding that we belong with each other, as opposed to this is being opposed on us by the elites or the powers that may be. I feel like it's supposed to be a continuous conversation. I believe in dialogue. I believe in continuous dialogue. That's my submission. Thank you so much for the question.
Thank you so much for your submission, my dada Wezi. I am going to ask again for people's question, thoughts, reflection about the current conversations that we are having. Yeah, and maybe part of me asking a question could be, what do we do? Do we have the conversation here and then go home and say we had an amazing webinar on the UN pronunciations, or do we carry the conversations? What do we do, people? So this is an open flow for you to tell us what you think needs to happen, because for me, there should be continuity beyond this webinar. The webinar was just to help us reflect and see how we can build a united front collectively, as a collective, to keep pushing. And I'm also, please raise your hand as I read. I'm reading some of your comments. And Naomi, you say our education curricula needs decolonizing. We need to curate curricula and reclaim our indigenous education. I totally agree with you, including indigenous knowledge, including indigenous knowledge on even medicine, um, and planets and all these things. My friend Petronilla always jokes about how I'm so obsessed with the library in Timbuktu, and I know very well right now it's not it's no longer in the original form, but I still want to witness in my lifetime how the Timbuktu library looks like before I leave this earth, you know. Um, so please raise your hand. The floor is yours. Me, I'm just refreshing to see whether there are new questions. There are new questions that need answering.
Hi, Annie. Can I share a thought?
Yes.
While you were so I English. I feel like Africa is misrepresented on the global stage because the biggest broadcasting networks since time immemorial were never the African ones. Okay, it was like a subset of the British, broadcasting corporation, BBC Africa, you CNN Africa, but I don't think there's been a global um, news or broadcasting entity that has got the reach that these other corporations have had. So, growing up, I don't know about you, Annie, and everybody else on this webinar today, but I was seeing the representation of Africa in the lens of poverty and disease. So I can only imagine what the world thinks about Africa because of the way that Africa was branded from inception. A lot of people genuinely are ignorant about Africa. And then also, we ask ourselves questions about the materials that people consume with their education system beyond the African border. So the recommendation that I can suggest right now is to influence policies in our respective countries. Okay. For me, I am a certified United Nations SDG supporter for SDG number 4, which is quality education, and I'm very, very passionate about that. I think that we should push for quality education. What exactly are the learners learning, and how exactly are they learning it? Are they just learning about the fact that Africa has been poverty stricken? Are we just learning about the scramble of Africa? Are we just learning about the disunity of Africa? Is there anything positive that anybody is learning? Anything truthful, not fictitious positivity, not Black Panther, like real African heroes about Kwame Nkrumah? Why isn't he popular in the rural outskirts in most African countries? But why do we have like David Livingstone, I said earlier on, as our hero? You see what I mean? And beyond that, how is Africa being represented in other curricula? Because if you're going to teach about Africa, you should get permission from Africans. How are you presenting Africa to the world? If you're just going to be talking about slavery, you're just going to paint this picture, continuous picture about Africans being victims all the time. There's so many great things that Africans have created, that they have pioneered, that they have survived, that is deliberately omitted from our history because of the perception that I think the world loves to maintain about Africa being a vulnerable bunch. So even not just curating the education system within the continent, but outside the continent, we should be in charge of how people teach about us, our history, our past, our present, and our future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dada. And you reminded me of my favorite author, Binyavanga Wainaina. His book is called How to Write About Africa, and how he
Yes.
talks about oh my God, there's so much that I could talk about in his book, because he challenges all the things that we do not challenge. For example, the ownership of African food, and who owns the food, and why certain cuisines, African cuisines, are linked to either Portuguese, or they're linked to Arabs. For example, I'm from Mombasa, and most of our foods would be likened and linked towards Arab, but cloves existed in the coast way back. And why do we still give them all that credit? So I totally understand what you mean by that, and the misrepresentation. And trust me, as someone who is a recovering journalist, you do not want to imagine the type of education that we got from from the journalism school, you know. But I'm gonna read something here that has been posted by my sister Anna from Mexico. And Anna, we would definitely give you 1 minute if you'd like to talk to us more, because the diaspora is one like of our partners within the Africans Rising Action Group. So Anna says, here in Mexico right now, we are facing several situations of linguistic discrimination against African and Haitian people, and nobody's talking about it. There was also a comment on presence of foreign military bases in Africa, and I know that's a live wire, but these are some of the things that we need to talk about when we start talking about who makes decision for Africa, and who owns what, and who does what on behalf of Africans, and who benefits from the conflicts that happen in Africa as well. So Anna, would you want to share more about the
Let's say
situation?
something after Anna.
Yes, yes,
Sure.
yes.
Thank you.
Anna, could you want to share more? Could you want to share more on what is happening in Mexico for the rest of us who are in this other part of the continent to hear? And then I think after that, I can allow you, Oyo, and then Linda to share a parting shot. You do not find the mic. Let me see. Oh, I'm not the co-host. Can somebody send Anna the microphone? Ask to unmute. Eunice, can you help me with that? The mic is on the, oh my God, okay. Eunice, can you help me to send Anna the mic? Okay. Oyo, as Anna is finding the mic, could you go first?
Sure. I think for me, we are at a critical juncture, and we really need to figure out how we are going to move, because we have to establish a concrete pathway towards reparations for our people, our nations, our nationalities. and do this on a framework that is anchored on clear economic, clear political, clear sociocultural, and clear ecological dimensions and fronts. And I think we need to do 3 or 4 things. Number one, we need a lot of background work and research on historical events and processes that inform our push for reparations. Number two, we need economic, sociocultural, political quantification of losses that we have incurred as African people and as the African continent, so as to establish a minimum baseline from which our claims for reparations from whether it's governments or institutions can be made. 3, we need autonomous and collective engagements with the African people and nations, regional and continental bodies like ECOSOC, institutions, organizations, and whatever spaces exist within civil society or avenues that can enable a unified and synergized push for reparations. And lastly, I think we need to create a workable and accessible framework through which people, communities, countries, nations, nationalities whose struggles for reparations reach a logical conclusion can meaningfully benefit from, whether it's the monetary compensation, the items being returned, or the knowledge that is coming back to the continent. And which also means at a very critical level that we must reform the neo-colonial state. We must be politically active because the neo-colonial state is created in the image of the colonial state. It subjects us to poverty, to humiliation, to death. We must be, some might call it activists, some might call it revolutionaries, some might call it active citizens, but we really have to be active in terms of how we transform the political spaces in our localities. And I think at a personal level, one of the things that I'm gonna do is to before the end of the year, I'm working with Nkani Books in South Africa to have an updated version of the book Reparations Now, and to include, because the first edition focuses mostly on the transatlantic and East African slave trade routes, to have it encompass everything that happened within the continent. And I think our little efforts add up. Our struggle for reparations is like people building a house. There's bricklayers, there's people who make the roof, there's people who paint the house, but all of them are builders. Like, they contribute to the building of the house. So I think all of us should also contribute to it in the little meaningful ways that we can. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to exit. I just took some medicine and it's made me really sleepy. I'm going back to sleep, but this has been a really meaningful engagement.
Thank you so much, Kamarandi, and thank you for doing that parting shot for us. And we would definitely excuse you. We totally understand, and we would definitely write back to you again for the follow-up actions after the webinar, because I see a question on the chat board asking what is Africa's Rising going to do. We will definitely consolidate all the thoughts and come up with a framework on which we can engage moving forward, because we definitely have all your emails and we would like to engage you further, especially both members and comrades from across the continent as well. I don't know whether, Anna, you already got the mic, but there is a point from
She has the
Tinashe
mic.
Gorongo.
She can just unmute herself and speak.
Okay,
Yes.
go ahead, Anna.
Thank you a lot. For me, it's very meaningful to listen the discussion, because here in Mexico, we are not talking about reparations. We are talking about recognition, constitutional recognition, because until 7 years ago, African descendant people has not constitutional recognition in the nation. So it implicates that we have not specifically frame of rights. But right now, We are facing several cases of linguistic discrimination against African descendant people and Haitian people because the migration extracontinental. And in Mexico City, I documented around of 50 cases of linguistic discrimination against a Black woman who, when they want to access in public services of health, they can't because the medical personnel doesn't speak the language, and some people speak English, some people speak Portuguese, for example, but we also have cases where people only speak a language, African language, like Americo, Fular, Wolof, or other language. And these cases are not giving to the correspondent instances like the National Commission of Discrimination. So for me, it's very important to talk about it because instead in Mexico and Latin America, when people talk about discrimination, linguistic discrimination, they talk of indigenous communities, but the discrimination is also African descendant communities and black communities that are coming to our countries, and it's like the people only thinks that discrimination is the exclusion, like the racial violence directly, like cases of policial violence or something like this. But we are facing a discrimination linguistic, and it's very, for me, it's very important because language is also history, and language is also memory. And when the language lose, we lose a lot of pieces of history of communities. Not only it's not only like one people doesn't want to speak their language. It's like when a community lose their language, we lose a piece of history and we lose a piece of memory. And I think that is very important, and that's my comment in general. And I am very grateful for this space. I'm sorry if my English is not well, but I'm trying to communicate and try to share my ideas and try to add some ideas and some things that are happening here in America Latina. And it is similar, it is also similar in a community from Guatemala, where the community lose their language. They lose a language that is like Garifuna, Creole Garifuna, and now they are not more a speaker language because structural discrimination. And it's very interesting how when in America Latina, or some countries of America Latina talks about reparative justice, language is like another side. It's like it seems like it's not important for people talk about the language of the African language. And I think I know that in Africa is one of the continents with a big variety of language in general. So that's my point. Thank you a lot.
Thank you so much, Anna, for bringing that to light. Last year, we worked with a lot of people from Latin America, including people from Sao Paulo, and we had similar challenges as well. And you don't really have to apologize for not speaking English. Even for me, English is not my first language. So this is a borrowed language, and so I mean, it's fine. I would be worried if you could not speak in your language, like in your African language. My friend Jessica Tavares from Mexico always says she's doing her best to learn learn high indigenous language as well, even though there is also discriminations in Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro as well. Thank you so much. And we are definitely happy to engage more to see if there is a way the Reparation Action Group can actually amplify some of these challenges that people are facing in your area. So I was doing this hoping that somebody would want to put a comment or questions, but also because we are very time, but I would give you, Linda, 1 minute just to wrap it up. Like tell us like your parting shot, and then I will come to you, Ambassador Kariu, your 1 minute parting shot, and then our movement coordinator Hadi Yakubu is going to do the closing remarks, and we'll call this an evening because it's already evening here in Mombasa. But before I do that, I do not want to leave somebody's point out, and I know my brother from Zimbabwe made a comment and say talking about internalized racism or inferiority complexes, most of the resistance around reclaiming narratives from my experience has been from our own people, especially the middle class. Yeah, I totally agree with you in many ways. I was trying to look for your name. I totally agree with you in many ways. And there is a book that I read, I think last year, by Zainab Badawi on Africa, on the role of our people, especially either the past people or the current people, the chiefs in the colonization and recolonization. So it's a whole lot of conversation there as well. Take your 1 minute, Linda, and then Ambassador Kariu, then we can come to you, Hadi, for the wrap up.
Thank you so much, Anne, and to everybody else on this call. For me, in wrapping up, it would be that can we make a conscious, concerted effort in pushing this conversation forward and moving away from being a talking workshop? Can we actually develop those frameworks that need to be developed? Can we push together with those from the transatlantic side and those in the diaspora space to be able to achieve this? There is a Swahili saying that says kidole kimoja hakiui chawa, which translated is one finger does not kill a louse, and therefore the need for concerted effort in this work that we are doing here. And then, like the painting behind myself, can we keep pouring into each other? And when the bottom is full, turn it over like an hourglass and pour back into those that need the feeling. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador William. Oh yeah, I still see him on the call. Um, as Ambassador William is preparing, Tinashe Goronga, I'm also part of the working group and looking at debt cancellation and reparations. And I'm happy to explore. We are definitely happy to explore because we cannot talk about reparations without the global tax architecture and financial architecture without being repaired, because it does not respond to African reality and the roles of the Britain institutions. So, Ambassador William, can you hear us? Okay, maybe. Okay, I guess, I don't know. I am not sure now, but I see Bright is still there. I know Wezi had already given us her parting shots, so that's why I'm not picking on Wezi. But as that is happening, Hadi, I will call you to do closing remarks for today's session. Hadi? Eunice, can I be heard? Because now I'm beginning to think probably it's my
You can be
network.
heard.
But oh, okay, thank you. Hadi,
be
can you hear us? Because I can see Hadi on the call, so I don't know. I don't know why he can't hear us. Eunice, do you want to reach out? For the thank you, Naomi.
Can you just
Yeah,
unmute
hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can hear you now.
Okay. I don't know why my video cannot turn on. Okay, I'll leave the video. So thank you so much, Anne, for wonderful moderation, and and to Eunice for organizing and arranging the logistics, and for the whole team for supporting. I want to thank the panelists for the insightful presentations, Ambassador William Carew. It's been a while, but thank you for the insights and for bringing the institutionality of the African Union to the discussion table in terms of how do we bridge the conversation between the institutions that we've put in place and then the people. Because I have always thought and believed that the reparations conversation is a people's conversation. And this informs the approach that Africans Rising has adopted in going to communities to organize and to have these conversations. I think we have some reports and communication regarding some of the community dialogues that have been done on reparations in places where you would never think a reparations conversation would be relevant. I think those can be shared with the participants and the panelists as well, and we can also try and put them in other forms for easy consumption. The Comrade Sungu, Wizi, and then remind me, the good doctor, also.
Linda.
My apologies for letting the name escape me, but thank you all so much for the insights. And I think somebody mentioned the point of making sure that we go practical. I think the conversations that we're having are necessary, but also who gets to be part of that conversation is necessary. So I'm told that the team is going to do other forms of engagement, including X spaces, because we want to reach beyond those who are already familiar with this conversation. We are building a movement, and so it pays to expand our horizon and to evangelize to people beyond the immediate circle of those who already are aware of what we're talking about. So X Spaces, TikTok lives, and whatnot to bring, especially the younger generation. Somebody talked about decolonizing education, because a lot of our education systems are like that. Someone talked about the namings that are there. And I was immediately thinking, wow, what if one of our reparations actions as Africans is probably to research about the namings of African streets and African villages after colonialists, and then launch a spirited campaign to completely rename all those things, including tourist attractions, Victoria Falls and whatnot. That would be, and Eunice and I had published an article about the reparations that Africa owes itself. There are so many of the things that we are looking at that can contribute to the repair that somebody else doesn't need to do for us. It is us who would need to do so. For renaming of things, removing the borders, for example, is something that these are things that we now have the power to do for ourselves. And the fact that we are not doing those things clearly speaks to the necessity for these campaigns that we are running. So I want to thank everyone for making it to this conversation, and let's keep in touch and build the movement stronger. In the final analysis, it is the collective voice of the masses of our people that will win this battle, and not necessarily the conversations in the boardrooms, much as they are also very important. So there is that need for that complementarity in what we are doing. Asante sana, and God bless us all.
Asante sana Hadi, and thank you so much everyone for making it to this conversation. Honestly, when Eunice and I were planning this, we knew that we wanted to have the discussion, but we didn't know that people will have all this patience to sit up to this time. We honor you for this. And of course, apologize for the technical hitches. I would like to thank each and every person that we reached out to be part of this conversation, and they accepted. Thank you so much. I know people have already been thanked, but then allow me to end by saying that these reparations we are talking about, each one of us has a role to play, and it doesn't have to be a big thing, and it doesn't have to be. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. You can start from where you are. My own little thing is to tell the stories of things that have already document, and I do that through photography by documenting traditional buildings, and sometimes share stories that my grandmother tells me every now and then. So you too can do your little thing, just as Wangari Maathai says, asanteni sana, gracias, merci beaucoup, bonjour, bonsoir à tous. And thank you so much. What language did I not say in Siabonga? And thank you so much for connecting from the different places that you connected from. I feel like the whole continent was here. I mean, based on everything that I'm seeing, from Tulisia to Ntabiseng to Majorca to Pash, to all of you that I'm not able to mention. And we hope this is not the last engagement. As you had, next month we'll have an engagement on reclaiming our narrative through retelling the oral narratives in forms of different arts. And we will definitely be joined by a group of artists that are already doing that across the continent. And some of them are even doing that by playing the kora, like Bilako Sissoko from Mali. And there are other people who are playing the nyatiti. And so I'm super excited for that conversation as well. But most importantly, be assured that all your thoughts and contributions will be put together and be sent to you and these recorded live sessions for action and definitely follow up. Thank you so much, and kwaherini. Bye to all of you. Enjoy the rest of your evening. For those of us who it's already evening, and the rest of the afternoon for those who it's afternoon. Asanteni sana, and God bless you all. God bless Africa. Bye, everyone. Do you guys don't want to go? Do you want to stay? Thank you so much. Thank you, Nabire. Thank you, Delila, Clay, Barnes, Karanja, Maurice, Tulisia. You've always been here. Oh my gosh. Please pass my regards to the people of the South. Patchlim, Maurice, Doris, all of you. I mean, there's so many of you that I could mention, and I'm definitely so happy that we've come to the end of the call. For all of us. Thank you so much, my dad Awezi, as well, for coming to be part of this. Yeah. Can we please go home? Maurice, can you play the song as people go? No, but I'm not sure you have your laptop. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you. Sending you love and solidarity from whichever part of the continent you're joining from. Yeah, this is just me putting so many loves on the screen right now because I think that's what we